Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this edition of Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-eun in Seoul. We have a lot lined up today, so let's first get started with a look at today's highlights. As the price of Hanwoo, or Korean native beef, continues to go up, farmers are seeing their profits slide, along with the number of farms across the country. Chinese smartphone maker Huawei is aiming to overtake Samsung and Apple to be the world's top-selling smartphone vendor in the next 5 years. We have these stories and more coming right up. Hyundai Merchant Marine has successfully renegotiated lowering its charter fees with ship owners by an average 21% after first launching talks back in March. With that, it has cut costs by roughly $463 million out of the $2.1 billion it would have owed foreign ship owners over the next 3.5 years. In return for this, Hyundai Merchant is set to offer roughly $230 million in new shares for the ship owners and pay back the rest over the span of 5 years starting from 2022. The shipping firm's creditors, led by state-run Korea Development Bank, said although the rate reduction is not as much as the initial target of 30%, it is enough for the company to move forward on its self-rescue plan. With the charter rates settled, the country's second biggest shipper now has its eyes set on negotiating its membership, most likely with the global shipping alliance known as the Alliance, which is scheduled to start operations in April. Major banks here in Korea are considering lowering their interest rates after the nation's central bank slashed the base rate for the first time in almost a year. The banks are reportedly thinking over the timing and scope of their cut. Nonghyap Bank is expected to start the race by lowering the rates of its deposits and savings products as early as next week. Other commercial banks like KB Kookmin and Uri Bank are expected to follow suit within the next few weeks. The Bank of Korea on Thursday cut its key rate by 0.25 percentage point to a record low of 1.25%. And another stark warning on the dangers of air pollution. The OECD says that by 2060, outdoor air pollution could cause up to 9 million premature deaths annually and cost 1% of global GDP unless more stringent policies are adopted. And the news is even worse for Korea. The OECD report says if the country does not effectively tackle the issue, it will become the only member country that will see its number of premature deaths exceed 1,100 per 1 million in 2060, a threefold increase from 2010. It also projects the economic costs of air pollution will amount to roughly 0.63% of Korea's GDP. Non-member countries like China and India are forecast to see the highest premature deaths and GDP loss. The OECD attributed the high figures for Asian countries to their dense populations and high exposure to fine dust from emissions. The Korea Fair Trade Commission has made some crucial changes to its regulations in efforts to boost investment and corporate activities, including mergers and acquisitions. Our Kim Jung-soo has more.
The Korea Fair Trade Commission has announced a series of selective reforms targeting the country's major conglomerates with the aim of boosting domestic business activities. Before the change, Korean conglomerates needed to have a minimum asset of 5 trillion won or $4.3 billion before being subject to intense FTC scrutiny and regulation. As a result, 65 companies were placed on the FTC watch list from 2009 until today. Korea's fair trade law prohibited these conglomerates from making equity investments in affiliate companies. It also banned such affiliates from providing loan guarantees to one another because it could potentially lead to excessive power concentration in conglomerates. But with the reform in effect, the limit has been raised from 5 trillion to 10 trillion won, or $9.6 billion, thereby lowering the number of regulated conglomerates from 65 to 28. Publicly owned companies are exempt from this plan as well. The FTC has explained that the heightened criteria is an appropriate response to the nation's steady economic growth, as the combined assets of the 65 designated companies doubled from $1 trillion in late 2007 to roughly $2.1 trillion by the end of 2015. But the news has been met with mixed responses. Companies that have been let off the hook will now share various employment and tax benefits that were originally designated for mid-sized companies. But there are worries that this would actually disrupt the already struggling economic ecosystem.
A policy like this will only worsen the current polarization of the Korean economy as struggling mid-sized companies face even more competition from big corporations. The Korean government must strive to work out policies that benefit the whole of the economy.
Meanwhile, the FTC has also said it will coordinate its recent changes with other ministries to minimize negative spillovers and possible problems. Kim Jung-soo, Business Daily.
A top official from Mercedes-Benz says fully automated cars will be a common feature on roads around the world in the next 20 to 30 years. And our Hwang-jae sat down with the German automaker's CEO of Research and Development in North America for a closer look at the latest developments.
Driverless features of automobiles these days contain the technology to accelerate, brake, change lanes, and even bring themselves to a complete standstill.
The state of Nevada has just awarded the E-Class the only vehicle with a license to do autonomous driving testing on normal roads. So the vehicle is already equipped with such an amount of sensors and intelligence that it could actually serve as an autonomous vehicle.
So in the race to build fully automated cars, the question is,
how has the direction of development changed or become more focused?
There is a new direction coming up, which is more the revolutionary approach, where you start from scratch to really be able to drive autonomously in every situation.
Nisroy says it's no longer about adding more sensors or cameras, but about how to get cars to think for themselves. While automated vehicles won't drink and drive or doze off at the wheel, they're still unable to deal with unexpected events on the road, which means they lack the ability to make decisions, or in other words, think like a human. Now, the name of the game is bringing the technology that people saw when Google's artificial intelligence AlphaGo defeated Go Grandmaster Lee Se-dol into cars. Given the challenge, major auto manufacturers are striking partnerships with IT giants in Silicon Valley, despite fears that these tie-ups might drag them down to being low-value hardware suppliers in the longer term. Nisroy adds that securing the technology won't be the sole obstacle to driverless cars roaming the streets.
So we have to discuss with the legislative authorities what is possible now, where should the limits be, what will be the way forward, who will certify these systems, who is the neutral body to say they are really safe.
So there are a good number of roadblocks ahead, but as technological development speeds up, Nisroy believes the idea of truly self-driving cars becoming commonplace is still in sight.
If you want to really go to a dealership and buy a car and say, with this car, I'm not going to drive anymore, I'm only going to take a ride, this is going to be in 2030 from now.
And by then, it's likely that machine learning and thinking robots may have changed not just the auto sector, but our everyday lives. Hwang-jae, Business Daily.
Farmers raising hanwoo, or cows native to Korea, are constantly faced with the choice of whether to hold on to or give up their once lucrative business. This is as efforts to keep hanwoo a prized meat have backfired and are eating into farm profits. Our Lee Ju-young has more.
Koreans have generally been open to paying more for the country's indigenous beef hanwoo for many years, but that may have reached a tipping point. That's because hanwoo prices have been on a continual climb. According to Korea Institute for Animal Products Quality Evaluation, the wholesale price of hanwoo currently fetches around $16 per kilogram, up from $11 back in 2012. A report by the National Agricultural Cooperative Federation attributes the steep increase to the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement.
A lot of hanwoo farms closed after the 2012 Korea-U.S. trade pact because they were worried. They would have continued if it were worth it, but profitability took a blow.
As data from the Federation indicate, the number of Hanwoo farms has plunged to about 88,000 this year, down 42% from 2012. That means about 45 farmhouses went out of business every day for the past 4 years. On top of souring profitability, farms and the government pushed to limit the overall Hanwoo population in a bid to keep prices in check. This ended up making Hanwoo cows prohibitively expensive. What used to be a gain of at least $100 per calf has in the recent years become a loss of $50.
They say the market price is good right now, but it's so expensive to raise a Hanwoo calf. I don't even know how much I can sell it for in the next 2 years.
Not only that, the strategy to differentiate local and import meat by pushing out higher grade Hanwoo meat at exorbitant prices has only backfired. At this, the government said it has drawn up a budget of roughly $1.6 billion to increase the supply of Hanwoo once again and relieve the burden of raising the country's price cattle. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
Today in our global section, we're going to take a closer look at the global smartphone market, specifically on Huawei. You'll remember that the Chinese company earlier sued Samsung Electronics on patent infringement charges. And this week, it said it has its eyes on the top spot. Our Eunice Kim joins us with more. Hello, Eunice.
Hello, June. Yeah, so at the Converge Technology Conference in Hong Kong this week, Huawei said that it has bold ambitions to become the world's top smartphone manufacturer, all within 5 years. So then who is Huawei and does it have a chance? Take a look.
Huawei wasn't making phones when it launched in 1987. The Shenzhen-based company started making phone switches before broadening its scope to building networking equipment and telecom networks. Today, it has surpassed Ericsson and Nokia to become the leading networking equipment manufacturer in the world. And now it says it has its eyes on becoming the top smartphone producer. Huawei's head of consumer electronics, Richard Yu, told the Wall Street Journal this week he plans to achieve the feat in 4 or 5 years, with a target market share of more than 25%. China's most global tech company has been steadily growing its market share since 2011, coming in at number 3 last year with 7.4% of the global market. And though it is still far behind dominant players Samsung and Apple, it's putting up a fight with cheaper prices and technology that's catching up. At a time when global demand is leveling off, especially in markets like the US and Europe, Huawei is still seeing steady rise in shipments, sending 107 million units to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East in 2015. But with smaller, newer players emerging back at home, the Chinese tech giant says it's now focusing on the top-level market. Huawei's Richard Yu said his company's growth is mainly coming from the premium market, the segment the company must conquer to become the world's leading vendor. In the footsteps of Samsung and Apple, Huawei's flagship phone, the P9, showed off a dual-lens camera, which it produced with German firm Leica. And Yu said his company is leveling up its partnership with Google, already realized in the Google Nexus 6P, by working together to build a virtual reality-compatible smartphone to be released in the fall.
So the smartphone market is certainly getting crowded, but there are many players emerging out of China as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, some Strategy Analytics released smartphone rankings in the first quarter, January through March of this year, by sales and not units. And this is what it showed. It showed that 3 of the top 5 slots were taken by Chinese companies, Huawei, Oppo, and Vivo, edging out Korea's LG to 6th place, having only made up 2.7% of first quarter global sales.
And Huawei has been steadily climbing in rankings, be it in shipments or sales. But what makes Huawei more competitive than its Chinese counterparts?
Well, industry contacts I spoke to, they pointed to two things. They said that Huawei sets apart in two areas, and that is patents that they hold and the technology that they hold, given the company's strong background in telecom networks and related equipment. They say the recent lawsuit it filed against the world's top smartphone manufacturers, Samsung, was not driven so much by a desire for money, but access to some of Samsung's patents that are integral to telecommunications platform, which is in turn crucial in the success of smartphones. There's also been observations that Huawei made the very public motion of filing lawsuits in Shenzhen and California to reap a marketing effect from it, particularly as it has its eyes on the U.S. market. So Huawei has not been able to break into the U.S. market to the extent that it wants to, because although it is a private company, the U.S. government has had cybersecurity concerns about the Chinese company. And last week it was reported that the U.S. Commerce Department is demanding Huawei hand over information about its exports to sanctioned countries such as North Korea, Syria, and Iran.
We'll definitely keep an eye on how it overcomes that obstacle.
Yep.
Thank you so much for coming in today, Eunice.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
And that wraps it up for today and this week. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll be back next week with more business news that matters to you. Until then, goodbye.